Okay, everybody, welcome to part 4 of this discussion. This should be the last segment, I'm hoping, if I don't ramble too much. The ignorance of mainstream Christianity regarding Yahweh's law. And then after this, of course, we'll get into the real heart of this discussion, talking about the Shabbat itself and how mainstream churchianity is, quote, living in sin because they're not observing Shabbat. If you were the true followers of this Jewish book, you would be keeping the Jewish Sabbath of the Jewish God. Funny, isn't it? They not only don't know who the God is they're supposed to be worshiping, one single individual called Yahweh, not 3 persons, but they don't even know what holy day is supposed to be the one that they're observing on behalf of that one single Jewish God, the Jewish Sabbath. All their talk, and yet they're missing the boat on some of the most important doctrinal issues in that damn book, which, again, they shouldn't be following anyway, but all the lip service they pay to the damn thing, claiming, believing that they're following it, when all they're following is their goddamn cult and its traditions that go back to the early centuries. And, have absolutely nothing to do with the Old or the New Testament. Anyways. So let's look at some New Testament passages that confirm the abolition of the ceremonial and civil laws, not of the 10 Commandment law, as we've already seen. These passages talk about the abolition of the ceremonial laws of the cross. And this came through Paul, don't forget. Peter, James, and John, the original followers of Christ, they didn't know anything about this. The only thing that they thought was abolished was the laws pertaining to sacrifice, but they thought everything else, was still to be in place. Paul is the one that came along and said to dispense with that, only because it was more appealing to his Gentile audience. He eventually forced the hand of the other Christian leaders, the Jewish Christian leaders, right? Paul was a Jewish Christian leader too, but again, he was trying to Gentilize this Jewish branch religion called Christianity. But don't forget, all the while he was Gentilizing it by de-Jewificating, de-Jewifying or whatever, these ceremonial laws, right? Getting rid of circumcision and the feast days and blah, blah, blah. All the while he was doing that, he was, in fact, still Jewifying his Gentile audience by telling them that they're becoming children of Abraham. He was pissing off the mainstream Jewish world as well as the Jewish Christian world, the original followers of Christ, in doing this. They had no intention of mass converting Gentiles, ever. That wasn't taught to them by Christ because that wasn't part of Christ's mission. This was Paul's mission. But anyway. So let's look at some New Testament passages that do talk about Christ abolishing, the law, but it's not talking about the 10 Commandment law. That was never in question, and it was never understood to be the 10 Commandment law. That wasn't the issue. It was the sacrificial and ceremonial. Well, not the sacrificial, but the ceremonial and the civil laws. That's what the question was. That's what the objection was. But eventually, like I said, the other believers, the Christian believers in Jerusalem, went along with Paul because they figured, well, these things aren't really important. It's not what defines sin. Paul has a good point. God didn't write these laws and put them in and speak them before the people. Moses did all of that. Those were put in a book, whereas the 10 Commandments are the moral law that was put on stone. So they did go along with it. So let's look at some examples now. There are several New Testament passages which confirm that the ceremonial/civil laws were indeed done away with by Christ, and it's the Sunday-keeping Christians that come along and misquote and misapply these passages to give the impression that they're talking about the moral law, the 10 Commandment law, and thereby they're free now to disregard the Sabbath. What they're really doing, though, is playing word games, whether they realize it or not. Their leaders certainly realize it. But they're playing word games because if you ask them, so the law isn't important, the 10 Commandments, so that means we can steal now? They won't agree to that. That means we can kill now? Well, no, that's not what that means. That means I can commit adultery. Hey, I like my friend Jim's wife down the street. I'm gonna hit on her now. It's okay to do that. They'll say, no, that's not what that means. Oh, really? How about the Sabbath? Is it okay to violate the fourth commandment and disregard Saturday? Oh, well, yeah, that's okay. Christ did away with that at the cross. You see the game they're playing. It's bullshit, guys. It's bullshit. If they're going to be consistent with following this Jew book, they have no warrant for disregarding the fourth commandment and, tossing the Sabbath out. Don't forget, Christ said, whosoever shall break one of the least of these commandments. He's talking about the goddamn 10 commandments. He's not talking about the ceremonial law there. He's talking about the 10 commandments. Whosoever shall break one of the least of these shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. And yet, almost the entire Christian world is doing just that by, tossing the Sabbath out. And so, yeah, they will misquote the passages we're now going to be looking at that do talk about Christ abolishing, quote, the law, but it's not the 10 Commandment law. Obviously, it is the ceremonial and the civil law. But they misquote them so that they feel justified in disregarding the Sabbath. They're full of shit. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. None of them. Just like when they try to defend the Trinity doctrine from the Bible. There's no defending it from the Bible. You can defend it from your precious cults, policies, their baptismal vows, Catholic Church decretals down through the years. Yeah, you can defend it that way, but you can't defend it biblically. Your church decretals is just shit they made up in the ensuing centuries, just like the shit that the authors of the Bible made up when it was originally written. That's made up shit too. It all is. But once again, don't tell me that you're a believer and a follower of the Bible if you're observing Sunday instead of Shabbat, when you're worshiping a triune God instead of the only true God, the mass-murdering psychopath in the clouds called Yahweh. Anyways, you got to love it, though, because Christ himself made it clear who the one true God was, right? In his Gethsemane prayer in John chapter 17, verse 17, he's praying to his Dada, his precious Yahweh fire-breathing dragon god, and he says, you who are the only true God. That's interesting now, isn't it? Christ wasn't addressing a triune deity there, of which he was supposed to be 1/3 of, right? When he was addressing God or his Dada, Yahweh, he was calling him and him alone the only true God. Who is the only true God? Yahweh, according to the Bible, according to what Jesus said right there. He wasn't addressing a triune entity as God. He was speaking to only one individual, his Dada, calling him not just the true God, not just the only God, the only true God. And yet Bible dupes, right over their heads, because you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Anyway, so as I said, some of these passages sometimes make reference to just the law of Moses. Sometimes they'll just say the law, but it doesn't matter. It's clear what they're talking about. They're not talking about the 10 Commandments. Once again, they're talking about the ceremonial/civil laws. Matthew tells us how when Christ died, Matthew, nod, nod, wink, wink, whoever the hell wrote that book, he said that when Christ died, the veil in the temple was allegedly torn down, down the middle, thus signifying the end of all animal sacrifices, and that the system of the ceremonial laws that prescribed them were now abolished. This is, what the Gospels state, right? At the moment he died, supposedly by some unseen, unknown force, or it's supposed to be Yahweh, divinely tore the veil that separated the holy from the most holy place, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept and blah, blah, blah. That veil was torn, where only the high priest was allowed to go once a year on Yom Kippur. But now, with that veil being torn, that meant that, Mr. Yahweh's presence doesn't dwell there anymore, supposedly. There's nothing sacred now about the most holy place because this whole system of sacrifice was abolished. That system that Paul said in the book of Hebrews, was of no avail anyway, because the blood of goats and bulls can never take away sin. So Yahweh instituted mass slaughtering of animals on a daily basis, having them suffer miserably as they bled to death, hanging upside down with a kosher killing. All of those, mercilessly slaughtered animals were done for nothing, as it turns out. What a fucking joke. But anyways, nevertheless, this divine supposed tearing of the veil in the temple marked the end of the sacrificial system. Here's how it's worded in Matthew 27:50 and 51. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. What does that mean? He gave up his ruach, or his pneuma, the spirit of life that was in him, the spark of life that made him alive. Doesn't mean he had a disembodied entity floating like Casper out of his body. He gave up the ghost. He died. And behold, it says, the veil in the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Yeah, whatever. Supposed earthquake tore the rocks. Yeah. Funny how we have no reference to this anywhere in any writings from that period of a great earthquake at this time. And we certainly don't have any extra biblical references to supposed graves opening up en masse and, hordes of dead bodies coming out of the graves and meeting up with their loved ones, being reunited. That's the impression in the Gospels, right? That when Christ died, the graves opened up, and many, it says, many which slept arose. Christ's resurrection as a token for what's to come later, supposedly prefiguring the ultimate resurrection when Jesus returns the second time. This was to prefigure that, right? So this is a sampling of the, power that Jesus accomplished with his death, over death for everyone. It says, many of the saints which slept arose and went into the city, clearly meaning to meet up with with loved ones, right? They went into the city. Can you imagine, guys, how Bible dupes swallow that horse shit and never ask, well, wait a minute now. If that happened, don't you think we'd have some record of it? I mentioned this before, I'll say it again. We have more records from the first century that have survived to our day than from any other period, written records, than from any other period in history. And a lot of them are from the Middle East, right from Jewland, right? How is it then, God fucking damn it, that we have not even the slightest hint of any knowledge of this, what would have to have been the most significant event in all of recorded history, when people who had died and been buried and been in their grave for years suddenly came forth alive again and were united with their loved ones. This is the horse shit the Bible feeds us. And yet there's no record of it. Not even the fucking writings of Josephus, the writings of Philo of Alexandria, who was a fucking Jew himself, who was born and raised in Judea, later moved to Egypt. How the hell is it that neither him nor Josephus, whose life's work was recounting a history of Judea in the first century, they don't fucking make any reference to that at all, do they? They don't talk about the order either of Herod that supposedly went out to order the death of all infants 2 years and under that we're told about, in the book of Matthew. Herod was upset that there was this king of the Jews that was born. He didn't want competition, so he ordered all babies. He didn't know which one was Jesus, so he ordered all babies 2 years and under to be fucking mass slaughtered. What a bunch of horse shit. That would have caught the attention of not just Josephus and Philo, a great many others. There's no reference to it anywhere at all. Josephus, in fact, hated Herod. He spent quite a bit of time documenting Herod's crimes. And yet he doesn't mention that. That would have been the number one crime to expose, right? What a fucking bunch of hooey, man. And yet Bible dupes believe that their holy book, amongst other things, is a history book. History my ass. It's a fucking fairy tale book. Jesus didn't even exist. He existed only in the person of Judas Chrestus, whose life story they based the Jesus character on. Added a bunch of sugar and spice to it, of course, and everything not nice. But there was no character, Jesus Christ. There's no reference to any such individual anywhere outside the Bible. That's all you got to go on, Bible dupes. And yet when you look at that fucking book, its supposed historical recollection of the Jesus character is so completely inconsistent from one gospel to the next. Go back earlier in this channel and look at my series on contradictions in the New Testament, well, Old Testament too, but look at my series on the New Testament contradictions. Most of the contradictions I point out in there are right from the gospel accounts of the life of Christ. And most of those contradictions are focused around the period of his death, burial, and resurrection, the most important part of the story of Christ's life. And that's where most of the contradictions are found. Holy shit! That's supposed to be the culmination of the whole Bible message from Genesis to Revelation. There's no more important part in the Bible, according to Christians, than the account in the Gospels of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. That's the culmination of Yahweh's plan, right? The most important fucking thing. And that has the most contradictions in it, the most heavily concentrated area of contradictions in the entire fucking Bible. The Bible's loaded with contradictions, but you won't find more concentrated in any one area than what you will find in the story of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. Every detail conflicts with the parallel details, or what are supposed to be parallel details, in the other Gospels, right? Oh, some might harmonize. Matthew might be in harmony with Luke over here, but Mark isn't over there. And then John says something else completely different. I cover this thoroughly in that series. Go check it out. See for yourself how phenomenally inconsistent the fucking gospel accounts actually are. Bible dupes don't even know this. They think that there's, a smooth weave, between the gospels, that they're in complete harmony with each other. And then, on the occasion that Christian apologists will acknowledge that there are contradictions, some of them will fucking lie to their readers and say, oh, there's no contradictions. The Bible's perfectly consistent. It's infallible. On the occasions that they'll admit that, yes, there are contradictions, they'll fucking try to get around it by saying, well, you can understand that because it's written by humans, and yes, you're going to get some mistakes in there. To me, some have said, to me, that adds to its, its reliability, because it shows us the human side. It adds to its reliability when it fucking contradicts itself? But guys, according to the Bible's own teaching, the shit that it says about itself, there should be no contradictions at all. Jesus said, sanctify them through thy truth, O great Yahweh in the clouds, for thy word is truth. He calls his word truth. When you call something truth, there's no room for error there now, is there? If there's error, then it's not fucking truth. Furthermore, when they say that, oh, well, you can expect mistakes because man wrote it. Yeah, man wrote it. But the Bible says that it was inspired by God. Paul says all scripture is given by inspiration of God. So you got a problem now, you apologeticists who claim that, well, it can have mistakes and that's okay. So what you're saying is then, since the Bible says that all scripture is given by inspiration of God, so what you're saying is then that even though it was written by man, but inspired by God, that means then that God, your infallible God, inspired contradictions? He inspired them to write contradictions. It's the only conclusion you can draw. If you're going to say that those contradictions aren't a problem, well, then that means that your God, who said he inspired all of Scripture, right? That means your God inspired that. Your God gave reason for people who use reason to not believe the horse shit, because they can see that it contradicts itself and it's not worthy of belief. So your God inspired people to have reasons not to believe, and yet he's going to turn around and condemn them to fucking endless or eternal flames and an endless death because they didn't believe what's not believable, because he inspired it to be contradictory, so that, It discourages people who use common fucking sense to not believe it. You see, guys, what a trap this is. You're set up to not believe it by a God who apparently inspired this book, if you want to think that he's real and he inspired the book. Okay, so he inspired it to be loaded with contradictions so that people with common sense... So the Bible's only for suckers that don't have any fucking brains in their head and don't use common sense or don't know how to use common sense. Apparently don't have common sense, right? I thought I had common sense years ago and I believed that fucking thing. I finally woke up one day, smelled the roses and realized, holy shit. How did I fall for this? This thing is loaded. At the turn of every fucking page, it's loaded with contradictions. I never read the Gospels looking for contradictions, and so I never noticed them. You tend not to notice something if you're not looking for it, right? Just like if you don't know you lost a $10 bill, you're not going to go looking for it because you don't think you lost it. You didn't know you had it to begin with, right? And then one day, 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months later, you'll lift your pillow up, well, hopefully not your pillow. You'll change your sheets more often than that. Hopefully one day you'll move a pair of shoes under your bed or something and you'll find that $10 bill. Hey, where did that come from? You don't remember that you had it, so you don't know how it got there, right? You didn't know you lost it. That's how it was when I started seeing all the problems in the Bible. I had, read the Gospels many times over, but never saw these things because I wasn't looking for them, didn't know there was anything to look for. But once I saw that, holy shit, there are some contradictions here. Now I went looking for them, and I found them on every fucking page. See how the mind works, guys? When you're trained to think that something isn't there, you're not going to see it because you're convinced it's not there in the first place. No need to look for it. It's not there. It's the infallible word of God. Once you see it, though, you can never unsee it again. And you realize you were, in fact, fucking bamboozled. Anyways, enough of that. Let's get back to our notes. Notice in the next passage how the sacrificial law system is referred to as a foreshadow of Christ, meaning that when Christ came, it's not needed anymore. This, of course, is written by most likely Paul, who is the one that really pushed this idea. But here it is. Hebrews 9, verses 6 through 12. He said, the priest went always daily into the first tabernacle. He's looking back at the time of Moses, The priest went into the first apartment, the holy place, accomplishing the service of God, conducting sacrifices and whatnot. But into the second apartment went the high priest alone once every year. This was the Day of Atonement, right? Yom Kippur. The priest would only go into the second apartment, or the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was and where Yahweh's presence was supposed to dwell. Yeah, whatever. The priest went in there only once, first into the tabernacle, then later, ultimately, into the temple. Went in only once, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors or the sins of the people. He went in there with some of the sacrificial blood to sprinkle it over the frickin' ark, for atonement for the previous year's sins. The Holy Ghost thus signifying, he said, that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing. In other words, the purpose of all of this was just an object lesson pointing forward to Christ, which was a figure, he said, for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to conscience. In other words, it couldn't free your conscience from sin. This was all just an object lesson. That's what Paul here is saying. All these sacrifices didn't serve any function at all, except an object lesson. So Yahweh had them inflict all these miseries on these sacrificial animals for no fucking reason. It didn't serve any function. It couldn't make the practitioner perfect. It was just to teach them a lesson of how horrible sin is. See what sin does? It causes the shedding of all the blood of these animals. Yahweh instituted this. It didn't have to go this way. The psycho in the clouds, according to the Bible, came up with this plan as a means of teaching them an object lesson. Paul said, now we can see what this was really all leading to. There's no need for this anymore. We don't offer sacrifice anymore because Christ died. His sacrifice paid the real price. Those animals were just pointing forward, a shadow pointing forward to the real substance. Fucking unbelievable. He said this stood only in meat and drink, the meat offering and the drink offering, and diverse washings, the ceremonial cleansings, and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation, until the time of Christ, when real Reformation would come, the real restoration or eradication of sin through Christ's sacrifice. That's what he's saying. This was all just figurative. So basically, Paul is telling us here that Yahweh was just playing a big joke on you guys all that time. He didn't have to engage in all that horrific trauma inflicting on all those animals. Can you imagine, guys, in the hot desert, too, hearing the screams, the agony of these animals dying slowly, suffering, as they're hanging upside down, the blood dripping. They'd be squirming, try to get themselves loose. Smell of flies everywhere, just horrible, horrible fucking scene. Blood splattered all over the goddamn place. And now Paul is saying that was of no purpose whatsoever. Paul said, the blood of goats and bulls cannot take away sin. Yahweh had them do it for nothing. He said, but Christ being come an high priest of good things to come by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, meaning the tabernacle up in heaven. The tabernacle on earth was just this is, by the way, where you get the as above, so below bullshit from. Yeah, in Freemasonry, as above, so below. Because the temple, Solomon's temple, that Masonic iconography is based around, right, was only, and its future rebuilding, should they get their way with that, and probably well under Trump, the tabernacle always represented and will represent, if rebuilt, what's up in heaven. It's supposed to be just an earthly mirror image, if you will, of the heavenly temple, right? So anyway, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, the one up in heaven, not made with hands, not made with human hands. It was a foreshadow of the real temple up in heaven, not made with hands, but made by God, by him waving his magic wand. That is to say, not of this building, not of this world, not of this physical temple we have here. This is just a shadow of the real one up in heaven, where Jesus is now officiating as our high priest, is what he's saying. Neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood, he entered into the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption for us. Christ has entered now, not with the blood of goats and bulls, like the priests formerly did when they entered the holy place of the tabernacle or the sanctuary or the temple, right? They did that with animal blood going into the most holy place. Jesus now is going into this heavenly tabernacle for us with his own blood. Pretty gory, pretty fucking sick and disgusting. But nevertheless, you see his point, right? This old system now, Paul is saying, is abolished. It's not needed because now the real sacrifice has been accomplished. But that's interesting because why did they need all of this bloodshed before the cross to point forward to it? And yet we don't need it anymore to continue the sacrificial system to point back to the cross? You see my point. Why did they need it before? Why couldn't Yahweh have just said, one day I'm going to send my son and he's going to die for you. So keep that in mind and look forward to the time when my son will die for your sins. Why did he have to institute, according to this book of fucking nonsense, right? Why did he have to institute, if he exists? Does this make sense? There's an all-wise, all-loving, and all-fucking merciful God that he would allow animals to suffer for no reason, just as an object lesson. But if that was necessary then, why isn't it necessary now to still perform sacrifices? Instead of looking forward to the cross, though, we're now to look back to it, right? Why don't we need that object lesson now? This is fucking bullshit, guys. This is what this book teaches, though. They needed the object lesson then to point forward to the cross, but we don't need it anymore to point backward. What a bunch of horse shit. What a fucked up God, though, huh? To institute a program like this. And a program, of course, that ultimately not only required needless sacrificing and suffering of animals, right, by the millions, but now, in the new covenant, he required the sacrifice, supposedly, of his only begotten son. What a sick fucking prick, man. Anyways. But it's vital to recognize the fact that the moral law did not foreshadow anything. And so what Paul is talking about here, this foreshadowing, is in fact the ceremonial law. The ceremonial law that pertained to sacrifices. This has nothing to do with the Ten Commandment law. And yet Bible fucking dupes, the Sunday keeping ones, the dumbest of the dumbasses among them, would have you believe that this is the whole law. Christ did away with all of it now. Just so they can get away with ignoring Shabbat, the fourth commandment. It's bullshit. Paul here is clearly talking about the law of Moses, the laws that Moses spoke and wrote before the people, and that, amongst other things, prescribed sacrifices for sin, for the violation of the higher law, the Ten Commandment law. That's what was being referred to here. That's what was abolished, not the Ten Commandment law. All right, let's now take a look at another important passage from the book of Hebrews again, chapter 10, verses 1 through 10, and then 16 to 20. Before I read this, though, there's three important points that we need to walk away with from this passage, that it's going to make it very clear. First point is that the law was a shadow of things to come, right? When the term the law is mentioned here, that's not the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments didn't foreshadow anything. The Ten Commandments were intended simply to point out what sin is. It doesn't foreshadow anything. What did foreshadow things, though, was the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, right? The ceremonial and the civil laws. Those are what is being referred to as abolished. So when it mentions the law here, again, clearly, it's not talking about the friggin' Ten Commandments. And it wasn't understood as such in the first century. The second point from this passage is that this law being referred to here, the ceremonial law, is clearly what was being mentioned as not in effect anymore because Christ's death, served that function. And then finally, the third point is that it also makes it clear, while talking about the law being a foreshadow and now being abolished by Christ, it talks about another law or system of laws that Yahweh does want to be kept, that Yahweh is supposedly writing on the hearts of his followers, meaning the Ten Commandment law, of course, as outlined in Exodus 20. Those laws he wants written on the heart. In other words, you'll keep them now out of love for him and appreciation for what he did in sending his son to, squirt blood all over the place, like you see in Mel Gibson's movie there. That is the most disgusting. Did you guys ever see it? I just had to watch it. Actually, at the time I was a believer. So the first time I saw it, I ate it up like most other Christians. But, looking back on it, wow, was that a disgusting, gory ass fucking film. From the word go, guys, from the very beginning to the very end, that's all it focuses on is blood. Blood. I remember the camera would zoom in on what was supposed to be drops of his blood falling, and it would show the blood hitting the ground and splattering, splashing up, and holy shit. Christians would see that and, praise the Lord. They'd get all enamored over it when in fact it was nothing but gore. Fucking disgusting shit, man. Only a Jew book could take a gory scene and turn it into something that gets people all excited about and think that it's, inspiring and holy. It's fucking gory, disgusting shit. Oh, he loved us so much to do that. Really? Your psycho God loved you enough that he sent his son to be tortured and bleed and suffer? Get the fuck out of here, for God fucking sakes. Wow, man. Your God is a psychopathic fucking piece of shit. That's the best plan he could come up with, huh? A 10-year-old could come up with a better fucking plan than that. You simply forgive people if they've offended you by picking a piece of fruit. Like that. That really warranted all this mess. That's the Bible's explanation, guys, for why this world is so fucked up. Our supposed foreparents picked a piece of fruit that big bad Yahweh told them not to even touch. The day you shall eat from it thereof, or even touch it, thou shalt die. He put the tree there himself, knowing that Eve was going to be deceived. So he had an excuse to say, okay, you little bastards, now you're going to get it. I'm going to be entertained now for the next umpteen thousands of years, sitting back and watching you suffer for what you and your children are responsible for. I'm going to hold everybody responsible for what you guys did. Get the fuck. And even animals, right? Yahweh cursed Eve and said that from now on, when you have a baby, you're going to suffer the pangs of childbirth. And yet, female animals that give live birth too also suffer. That's funny. He's not only punishing all future generations of human women with birth pangs, but fucking animals too? What a psycho fucking prick. Don't forget, he's the son of a bitch who said that he would punish unto the third and fourth generation for the sins of the fathers. Interestingly, though, later on in the book of Ezekiel, this same psycho bastard, who clearly said he was going to punish the sons for the sins of the fathers unto the third and fourth generation, he later says, in classic biblical contradictory fashion, he later says in the book of Exodus, I shall not bring upon the sons the sins of the father. Every man shall suffer for his own sin. Isn't that interesting? And so Bible dupes will cite that and say, see, no, you're misunderstanding. God isn't that way. No, you're misunderstanding. Your fucking book contradicts itself. Sure, it sounds better in the book of Ezekiel. Yeah, that sounds good. That should be how it is. One person suffers for his own sins, not the sins of his forefathers. But that's not what it says in fucking the book of Exodus, baby. So now you can add another problem to the list. Your God is a schizophrenic bastard. Fucking unreal, man. Anyway, let's read this passage or I'll never get through this set of notes here before the hour mark. Here it is. For the law, having a shadow of good things to come and not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year after year, continually, make the comers thereto perfect. Those sacrifices didn't accomplish anything, Paul is saying. Could never make them perfect. It's only Jesus and his shed blood that can do that. So again, why did the son of a bitch even implement this fucking thing to begin with? Imagine all the animals that were slaughtered over the centuries, guys, for no reason. For there they would not have ceased to be offered. Or he asked, wouldn't they have ceased to be offered? In other words, if those sacrifices did bring, freedom from guilt of sin and true atonement, why did they have to be continually offered? That's his argument. The fact that they had to continually be offered shows that they didn't accomplish anything. All right, so then why did the fucking prick institute it? There was no need for it. No need. No need. Merciless, needless infliction of horrific suffering on animals by the millions and millions for century and century on end for no fucking reason. Praise Yahweh, everyone. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward here because I don't want this video to go past the hour mark here. So I basically covered the gist of this passage. Paul is clearly saying that one law is abolished. There's another one, though, that God is going to write on our hearts. That's not the same law that was abolished, obviously. That's the 10 Commandment law. Anyway, let's push forward here. I want to get through this so in the next video we can get on to the Sabbath discussion. This next passage is Colossians 2, verse 14, where Paul said, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Paul is saying here that there is a law that has been abolished, a law of ordinances. The 10 Commandments aren't ordinances. That's the law, right? He's talking here about the sacrificial system, the whole circumcision, on and on, blah, blah, blah. The ceremonial laws. He says these ordinances have been nailed to the cross. Not the 10 Commandment law, but the ordinances. Notice, though, how he said this law that was against us, which was contrary to us. Yeah, if you look at the old Mosaic law, it was against the people. It was contrary to them. It called, for example, for the stoning of someone who simply gathered firewood on Shabbat, right? How hideous. And yet, that law, according to the Not-So-Holy book, was issued by Yahweh himself, personally given to Moses. But, Moses is the one who wrote it down and spoke it to the people. But it did come from Yahweh. Yahweh gave them a law which was not good and which was contrary to them. In the book of Ezekiel, Yahweh, referring back to these laws, the ceremonial laws, he actually said, I gave them laws which were not good, whereby they should die, meaning the laws pertaining to stoning. He's kind of boasting about it. I gave them crappy laws whereby they got stoned. He's actually admitting that the laws he gave them were shit laws. Wow. How do you like your Yahweh now, Bible dumbasses? Anyway, here's another one along this same line. Ephesians 2, verse 15, Paul said, having abolished in his, meaning Christ's, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances. These commandments are not the 10 Commandments. These are the commandments contained in ordinances, not laws, ordinances, the ceremonial law. For to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace. So he's talking here not about the 10 Commandment law, but yet many Bible dupes will cite passages like this to give the impression that it is, in fact, talking about the 10 Commandment law so they can get out of their obligation to keep Shabbat. They're not out of their obligation if they're going to follow this book. Paul is not talking here about the 10 Commandment law. Couldn't be more clear. And again, just in case there's any doubt, look at what we read, going back to the Old Testament now, the books of Moses, right? Numbers chapter 19, starting with verse 2. This is supposed to be Yahweh talking here. This is the ordinance of the law, or this is Moses talking. This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord commanded, saying, speak unto the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer without spot. And then it goes on to describe, the sacrifice of the red heifer, blah, blah, blah. This is the law of ordinance, or the ordinance according to the law, that Paul was just talking about, that Christ nailed the law of ordinances to the cross. Ordinances pertaining to sacrifice, pertaining to circumcision, pertaining to the observance of the feast days. All of that was abolished. But again, not the 10 Commandments, guys. You don't have to be a genius to figure this out. The Bible is very clear on this particular issue. And yet Bible dupes either don't get it or, in many cases, they're deliberately twisting it. Their leaders certainly are. So they can weasel out of the fact that they're not obeying one of the 10 Commandments. Exodus 12:43 similarly says, and the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. there shall no stranger eat thereof, meaning Gentile. No Gentile was to eat of the Passover. It was only for Yahweh's chosen ones. You know, the guy that says he doesn't play favorites. But in any case, notice, this is another ordinance pertaining to the observance of Passover, right? That's not part of the law, the Ten Commandment law. It's an ordinance. These are the ordinances that Paul was referring to that were abolished. Hebrews 7:16 says, who was made not after the law of a carnal commandment, but after the power and end of an endless life. He's talking about Christ, right? Christ wasn't ordained after an ordinance, at the hand of a carnal creator, not at the hand of, Moses, who wrote those laws, even though God supposedly gave them to him. Moses wrote the ceremonial laws in a book. Those are a carnal law, but the divine law, the Ten Commandments, was to be understood in sharp distinction from what Paul was talking about here. Can't miss it, can't mistake it. Here's another passage along this line, Romans 7:14. Paul said, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. Paul just talked about a carnal law, right? Yeah, that's the ceremonial law. But now here he's talking about a spiritual law. What law is that? The Ten Commandments. Paul said, I'm sold under sin. He's talking about the law that defines sin. That's the moral law. That's not supposed to be a carnal law. That's a divine law. Again, do you not see the difference? A very simple, plain, and easily understood difference that Bible dupes just don't get. By the way, that Ezekiel passage I mentioned earlier, here it is. It's Ezekiel 20, verses 24 and 25. I'll just read the last part of verse 25. Wherefore I gave also statutes that were not good, and judgments whereby they should not live, i.e., be stoned, be put to death. Here's Yahweh admitting that he gave them laws that were not good. Isn't that interesting? Didn't Jesus say that a good tree cannot produce bad fruit and that a bad tree cannot produce good fruit? Well, here's Mr. Yahweh, supposedly a good tree, and yet admitting that he gave bad fruit. I gave them laws which were not good. According to Jesus' own testimony, doesn't that mean that Yahweh is a bad tree? Yeah, absolutely it does. Absolutely. If the son of a bitch can say he gave them laws that were not good, whereby they should die, then he's a fucking prick. He's not only not good, he's fucking evil, right? Oh, he's evil for a lot of reasons. But there's one right there by his own admission. He has to be bad if he gave him laws that were bad, right? How could a good tree bear bad fruit, according to what Jesus said? Son of a bitch. Anyway, here's another one. Paul said, wherefore the law is holy and the commandment holy and just and good. Romans 7:12. He's not talking about the ceremonial law there. We just read where Yahweh said he gave them laws that were not good. That's the ceremonial law. The law that prescribed, for example, stonings, right? Those were not good. But here Paul is talking about another law that is good, the Ten Commandment law. Another distinction drawn here. I read this before, but let me read this short passage again here. Paul says in Romans 3:31, do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. Clearly, Paul is not talking about the ceremonial law here. This law, he says, we're not to make void. We're to establish it. We're to uphold it. This is not the ceremonial law, which Paul said Christ nailed to his cross. There is a very clear and sharp distinction between two different types of laws. Bible dumbasses. One of those laws you are supposed to uphold. That's the Ten Commandment law. And part of that Ten Commandment law is the Sabbath, the fourth commandment. Once again, if you want to profess to be Bible believers and be true about it and not the phony fucking liars that you are, stop following your little steepled corporation and actually do what you claim to be doing, but you're not. Observe Shabbat, which is the fourth commandment, or, as the Bible itself would say, lest you be found a liar. You're a liar. If you claim to follow the Bible and you're not keeping Shabbat, you're a fucking liar. So, go out tomorrow, buy yourself a yarmulke, get a menorah, and, light them up on Shabbat evenings, Friday evening, sunset. That's when the Sabbath starts. Not midnight, Saturday night until midnight, Sunday night. No, Shabbat starts sunset Friday evening and ends sunset Saturday night. That's the sacred day that Yahweh blessed, that he requires you, that he commands you to observe, lest you be violating one of his commandments and thus be found a transgressor of the law, as James says. And if you break one of these commandments, you've broken them all, says James. Jesus said it too. You break one of the least of these commandments, you'll be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Anyway, here's another passage along this line. Hebrews 7:12. Paul said, for the priesthood being changed, there is need, there is a necessity of a change also in the law pertaining to the priesthood, the ceremonial law. That's the law that needed changing. There's no longer an earthly priesthood now. Christ is supposed to be our priest up in heaven. So Paul is saying there needed to be a change in the law, an abolishment of the ceremonial law that's no longer needed because there's no more priesthood now on earth. Christ is our priest. That's what Paul is saying. That law he's talking about there has nothing to do with the goddamn 10 Commandments. Anyway, I'm trying to cram this through before the hour mark. I don't want to go over. 1 Corinthians 7:19. Listen to what Paul says here. Very clear. He said, circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of God. In other words, the only thing that's important is that you keep the commandments of God. What is he talking about? The 10 Commandments, right? That's what's important, he said. But circumcision and uncircumcision, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Of course, he's lying when he says that, right? Because, as we mentioned before, Paul participated in the circumcision rite in the book of Acts long after his conversion. He claimed to be against it only for his Gentile audience, not when he was with his fellow Jews. Nevertheless, though, he's saying now, in the Christian era, that the law of circumcision doesn't matter if you're uncircumcised or circumcised, doesn't mean anything now. That's all abolished. That was part of the ceremonial law. That was nailed at the cross. The only thing that's important now is keeping the 10 Commandments. The only thing that's important now is keeping the commandments. Sunday keeping Bible dupes out there. You're not doing it. You're not. But that's okay, because when you worship the triune God, you're not keeping the first commandment either. You got some real fixing to do there if you want to be consistent with your claim to be following the Jew book. You got the wrong God and the wrong day of the God you profess to be following. So you're breaking 2 of Yahweh's sacred commandments. Anyway, what do you know, guys? I did manage to finish before the hour mark here. So there you have it, guys. That concludes our discussion on Yahweh's law and the ignorance of mainstream churchianity regarding it. Ignorance because of the crap that churches taught them, claiming that what they were teaching is biblical. No, it isn't. A good deal of what pretty much all the churches out there teach has absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. It's absolutely contrary to what the Bible teaches. Once again, fuck the whole Bible. But you just got to love it, though, guys, how the vast majority of Bible dupes aren't even following the book anyway. It's so fucked up on so many levels. Anyway, in the next video, we'll be getting into the discussion on the Sabbath. We'll get into that in detail. We'll look at how, a little bit of history of how it came about. We'll look at the Catholic Church's boasting of how it introduced Sunday in place of the Sabbath, and how it marvels at the Protestant world for still following Sunday when they profess to be opposed to Roman Catholic teachings and Roman Catholic authority, and yet they're following Roman Catholic teachings and Catholic authority when they keep Sunday. They're doing the same thing, and the Catholic Church boasts about this too, as I've pointed out in the past. When they worship the triune God called the Trinity, they are also following Catholic tradition and, Catholic teaching. They broke away from the church and claim to follow the Bible only, but the Catholic Church laughs at them when they worship the Trinity and when they worship on Sunday. You have no basis for doing so, Protestant idiots out there. All you have is Catholic authority to go by. You have not your precious little Bible to back up your positions on either of those two matters. All right, guys. So thanks for joining me. We'll catch you in the next video. Take care.